They
We
say
have
a
to
creature
leave
without a
now.
wolf has no soul.
We cannot
That a
abandon our
throat
home.
without a howl
There's no
carries
time.
no
I
voice
will
worth
not
hearing.
run.
For 3 years, Seraphine Ashenvale had learned to live with both accusations carved into her silence. The stone floors of Stormwatch Castle were cold even in summer, but on this winter morning, they bit through the worn soles of her shoes with a particular cruelty. Seraphine moved through the servants' corridors like a draft of freezing air, invisible, insignificant, exactly as she had been taught. Her hands, red and cracked from lye soap, gripped the edges of a copper basin filled with gray water. The liquid sloshed against the rim as she navigated the narrow passage toward the scullery. A beta guard lounged against the wall ahead, his boot deliberately blocking her path. "Move aside, Stray," he said, not even looking at her. Seraphine stopped. She said nothing. She had learned long ago that words from a wolfless mouth carried no weight in a world ruled by predators. Instead, she waited, patient, still, a stone in a river of contempt. The guard finally shifted his boot, but not before kicking the basin. Water splashed across her frayed gray dress, soaking the hem. He laughed, a short bark of amusement, and walked away. Seraphine continued to the scullery. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply wrung out her skirt and began her work. This was survival. But sometimes in the deep hours of night when the castle slept and she lay on her thin straw mattress in the cramped servants' quarters, Seraphine would close her eyes and hear something else. A voice, elderly, warm, singing words she could not quite grasp. The melody would wrap around her like a blanket of starlight, and for those brief moments, she felt less like an absence and more like something waiting to be remembered. She had no memory before the age of 19. 3 years ago, the Border Patrol had found her wandering the edge of Whispering Woods, barefoot and speechless, with eyes that shone bright in the moonlight and no answers to any of their questions. No name, no pack, no wolf. The Obsidian Crest territory had taken her in as an act of charity, or perhaps pity. She was given the name Ashenvale because the head housekeeper had once known someone by that surname, long dead. She was given the gray dress of the lowest servant class. She was given a corner to sleep in and scraps to eat. She was not given kindness. In the hierarchy of the wolf packs, to be wolfless was to be broken, a mistake of nature. Those born without the ability to shift, without access to the sacred mind link that connected pack members, were considered soulless husks. Omegas at least had wolves. They had value in breeding, in pack structure. Seraphine had nothing, and yet she endured. She observed. She learned the rhythms of the castle, the patterns of power. She learned which nobles struck their servants and which ones looked through them as if they were furniture. She learned that silence was not weakness, it was camouflage. The winter solstice gala was 3 days away, and the castle had transformed into a hive of frantic preparation. Seraphine's days blurred into endless cycles of scrubbing, polishing, hauling, and vanishing the moment anyone of rank entered a room. On the morning of the gala, the head housekeeper, a severe woman named Marta, grabbed Seraphine by the elbow. "You," Marta hissed, "you will serve at the high table tonight." Seraphine's heart dropped. The high table, where the Alphaking sat, where the nobles prowled and preened, where one mistake could mean a whipping, or worse. "But I always work the lower." 2 girls took ill with fever. "You're all I have left." Marta thrust a clean apron into Seraphine's hands. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Do not spill a single drop, or I will have your hide. Understood?" Seraphine nodded. That evening, as the sun set in the castle's grand ballroom filled with the elite of the werewolf territories, Seraphine stood in the shadows of the service corridor and tried to steady her breathing. The ballroom was a vision of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped light like frozen tears. Silk banners in deep crimson and midnight blue cascaded from the vaulted ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of 500 shifting predators. Musk, pine, leather, and the metallic tang of barely restrained dominance. For the gathered nobles, this was a night of alliances and courtship. For Seraphine, it was a night of survival. She adjusted the silver tray in her hands and stepped into the light. The noise hit her first. Laughter, sharp and brittle. Conversations layered over one another in a cacophony of status displays. Glasses chiming, heels clicking on marble. Beneath it all, a low hum of power that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Seraphine kept her gaze down and moved along the edges of the room, a shadow among the glittering throng. Then the music stopped. The sudden silence was so complete that Seraphine froze mid-step. It was not simply quiet, it was submission. A physical weight pressing down on the room, forcing heads to bow and breaths to shallow. The Alpha King had arrived. Kale Nightborn walked through the arched entryway, and the world seemed to tilt toward him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, carved from some harder substance than ordinary men. His formal attire, a black jacket with silver threading, fit him with a precision that suggested restraint rather than decoration. But it was his eyes that struck Seraphine like a blow to the chest. Storm gray, restless, utterly exhausted. He did not look like a man searching for a queen. He looked like a predator searching for a reason not to tear the room apart. Beside him walked Regent Isolde Nightborn, his aunt and the woman who had raised him after his mother's death. She was a vision in silver lace, her posture rigid, her face a mask of cool assessment. She carried a cane topped with a sapphire, though everyone knew she did not need it. It was an affectation. Or perhaps a warning. Seraphine forced herself to breathe. She backed toward the service corridor, her only thought to escape the oppressive weight of the king's presence. But Marta appeared at her elbow, shoving a heavy crystal decanter into her hands. Wine service. High table. Now. Marta's whisper was harsh as sandpaper. Do not fail me, girl. Seraphine's fingers tightened on the decanter. The glass was cold. The wine inside was a deep red, older than her entire short memory. She could not afford to tremble. She walked across the ballroom floor, each step measured and silent. The high table sat on a raised dais, and as she approached, the air grew heavier. Alpha power rolled off King Kyle in waves, a tangible pressure that made lesser wolves cower. Seraphine felt nothing. No wolf to submit, no instinct to bare her throat. She was simply a human girl walking toward a king who could break her with one hand. Kale was speaking to a visiting diplomat, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The northern borders are secure. I have no interest in reopening trade routes that bring nothing but opium and insurrection. The diplomat, a thin man with sweat beading on his forehead, pressed, But your majesty, the traditions are dead men's baggage. Kale's tone could have drawn blood. He turned then, his gaze sweeping across the room with the boredom of a predator who had seen every hunt before. His eyes passed over nobles, over debutantes in glittering gowns, over the symphony of desperate ambition, and then his gaze landed on Seraphine. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Seraphine felt a jolt of electricity race up her spine, so violent she nearly dropped the decanter. Kale frowned. His nostrils flared slightly, as if searching for something. Confusion flickered across his face. He could not smell her wolf, because she had none. To him, she must have been a void, an absence in the tapestry of scent and power that defined his world. Seraphine lowered her gaze instantly and stepped forward to pour wine into Regent Isolde's goblet. Her hand was steady despite the king's burning stare. Isolde's voice cut through the tension like a blade of ice. Careful, girl. This vintage is older than your entire lineage. Seraphine finished the pour and executed a perfect curtsy, a motion drilled into her by 3 years of servitude. She turned to leave, desperate to escape the orbit of these two dangerous creatures. Wait! Kale's voice was not a shout, but it stopped her as effectively as chains. The entire ballroom froze. Conversations died. Even the musicians faltered. Seraphine turned slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on the knot of his silk cravat. What is your name? Kale asked. The question was simple, but the intensity behind it was baffling. Why would the Alpha King care about the name of a servant? Isolde interjected smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. She is the Wolfless mute, nephew. She cleans the scullery. Waste no breath on her. Kale did not look at his aunt. His eyes remained locked on Seraphine. I asked for her name, and if she is mute, she can write it. Seraphine's lips parted. She was not mute. She was terrified. But the command of an Alpha King was not something one could ignore, even without a wolf to compel. The weight of his authority pressed against her human mind, demanding obedience. Seraphine, she whispered. The word came out rusty, barely audible. Speak up, Kale ordered, his voice dropping an octave. I detest whispering. Seraphine drew a breath. She lifted her gaze and met his eyes for the first time. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear did not disappear, but it was joined by something else. A spark, defiant, unexpected. Seraphine, she said louder this time, clear. Kale's eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth to say something more, perhaps to ask why a girl with no scent had such unusual brightness in her gaze. But a sudden commotion shattered the moment. A messenger burst through the entrance, his uniform torn and bloodied, snow still clinging to his hair. Your Majesty! Rogues at the western gate! Chaos erupted, nobles screamed, Guards mobilized. The carefully orchestrated evening dissolved into a swirl of panic and shifting bodies. Seraphine used the confusion to slip back into the shadows, her heart racing not from the rogue attack, but from the way the king had looked at her, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he had not known existed. The rogue attack was repelled within the hour. They were disorganized, desperate exiles testing the borders. But the mood of the gala had shattered beyond repair. Nobles departed in clusters, their night of courtship ruined. Seraphine returned to the scullery and scrubbed dishes until her hands bled. She did not sleep. The following morning, the castle hummed with a different kind of tension. Regent Isolde had summoned the ladies of the court to the solarium for high tea, a ritual that served as both social gathering and political interrogation. Seraphine was assigned to the tea service. Marta's punishment for having caught the king's attention. The solarium was a magnificent glass-walled room filled with exotic ferns in the pale light of a winter sun. The air smelled of bergamot and ambition. Lady Thessaly Ravenwood sat at Regent Isolde's right hand, her posture perfect, her smile calculated. She was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and meant to cut. "The attack last night was dreadful," Thessaly said, sipping her tea with practiced elegance. "But it exposed the weakness in our perimeter defenses. If I were queen, I would double the sentries in the Blackwood." Isolde regarded her over the rim of her cup, one eyebrow arched. "Military strategy, Lady Thessaly? Do you intend to lead the armies or birth heirs?" The table tittered nervously. Thessaly flushed, but recovered quickly. "I only meant that the king needs a partner who understands strength." "Strength," Isolde murmured, setting down her cup. She reached for a leather-bound book that lay on the table beside her. The binding was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. "Strength is silent." She opened the book, and the scent of old parchment filled the air. "This is the rite of the first moon. It is written in the elder tongue, the dialect of the original royal bloodlines, a language dead for over 300 years. Isolde looked around the table, her gaze challenging. "If any of you wish to sit beside my nephew on the throne, you must understand the history you will represent. Who among you can read the first passage?" Silence descended like snow. The debutantes exchanged panicked glances. The elder tongue was a scholar's language, known only to the most dedicated historians. Its grammar was archaic, its pronunciation requiring a specific shaping of the tongue that had been lost to time. Lady Thessaly cleared her throat. "Your Grace, surely this is academic work. We are modern wolves. We need not—" "So you cannot read it," Isolde said flatly. "Disappointing." She squinted at the text, her brow furrowing. "The ink is faded. Something about the blood of the moon." She trailed off, frustration evident. Isolde pushed the book toward the center of the table. "It is a blessing for the harvest, a simple prayer." Seraphine, standing silent with a silver teapot, glanced down at the open page. The script was jagged, angular, looking more like claw marks than letters to the untrained eye. But to Seraphine, the letters did not look like scratches. They looked like music. The words rearranged themselves in her mind, lifting off the page with a strange familiarity that made her head spin. She knew this text. She did not know how, but she could hear the cadence of it, a voice deep and resonant echoing in her memory. "It's not a prayer for the harvest," Seraphine whispered. The room went deathly silent. Lady Thessaly whipped around. "What did you say, servant?" Isolde froze. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Seraphine with the focus of a hawk spotting prey. "You spoke?" Seraphine realized her mistake immediately. Her hands tightened on the teapot handle. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I spoke out of turn." "You corrected me," Isolde said, her voice dangerously soft. "You claim to know better than the regent." "No, Your Grace. I only—" Seraphine swallowed. "I read it." Isolde's expression was unreadable. She pointed a manicured finger at the book. "Read it, then. If you are so bold as to correct a queen, prove your insolence is not mere stupidity." "She cannot read, Your Grace," Thessaly scoffed. "She is a wolfless stray." "Read it." Isolde slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Seraphine set the teapot down with trembling hands. A strange calm settled over her, the same inexplicable clarity she had felt when meeting the king's eyes. The script on the page called to her. It demanded to be spoken. She looked at the passage. The words were ancient, the vowels elongated, the consonants requiring a soft purring click at the back of the throat. Seraphine opened her mouth, and the voice that emerged was not the hesitant whisper of a scullery maid. It was deep, resonant, elegant. The accent was aristocratic, each syllable rounded and precise, dripping with a linguistic grace that made the modern dialect sound crude in comparison. Vala morin this Kalayan drath namaris farandal, she recited, the strange words rolling off her tongue like liquid silver. The blood of the moon is not given. It is taken. The dragon eats the sun so the wolf may hunt in shadow. She paused, the accent hanging in the air, thick and undeniable. It is not a harvest prayer, Your Grace. It is a declaration of war, a warning from the era of the three crowns. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, total. Lady Thessaly's mouth hung open. The other debutantes looked terrified, as if Seraphine had just summoned a demon into the room. But it was Regent Isolda's reaction that was most shocking. The color drained from her face. She dropped her cane. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She stared at Seraphine, not with anger, but with recognition and utter horror. That accent, Isolde whispered, her voice trembling. No one has spoken the high tongue with that inflection since the fall of House Moonshadow. The double doors to the solarium burst open. King Kale strode in, flanked by two guards, his expression dark with concern. "Aunt," I heard shouting. "What?" He stopped. He looked at the frozen tableau, at his aunt, pale and trembling, at the noblewomen, terrified. And then he looked at Seraphine, who stood tall, despite her servant's dress, the echo of the dead language still vibrating in the air around her like a spell. "What happened?" Kale demanded, his voice sharp. Isolde pointed a shaking finger at Seraphine. "She speaks the king's tongue, the first king's tongue." Kale turned his full attention to Seraphine. The boredom was gone. In its place was a sharp, predatory intensity that made her pulse race. "Who are you?" he asked. Seraphine curtsied, but this time the motion felt less like servitude and more like muscle memory of a court she could not remember. "I am no one, Your Majesty, just Seraphine." "No one learns that accent in a scullery," Kale said, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space, his scent of rain and cedar wrapping around her. The proximity should have been threatening, but instead, it felt oddly grounding. "Speak again," he commanded, his voice dropping to a growl. "Say my name." Seraphine looked up into his storm-gray eyes. The connection flared again, hotter this time, a pull she did not understand but could not resist. "King Kale Nightborn," she said. The way she pronounced it, Kale with a taut and elongated vowel, Nightborn with crisp, precise consonants, made his name sound like an incantation. Kale's pupils dilated. His breath caught. "Clear the room," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Everyone out, now." "Your Majesty," Thessaly squeaked. "Out!" Kale roared, his alpha command slamming into the walls like a physical force. The solarium emptied in a flurry of silk and terrified scurrying. Within seconds, only Kyle, Isolde, and Seraphine remained. The morning sun filtered through the glass, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. But the temperature in the room had plummeted. Isolde had collapsed back into her chair, pressing a lace handkerchief to her lips. She watched Seraphine with the wary eyes of a general assessing an enemy. Kale circled Seraphine slowly, like a panther stalking prey. She stood her ground, hands clasped in front of her apron. She focused on breathing, on keeping the sudden throbbing headache at bay. The reading of the text had unlocked something behind her eyes, a pressure building against a dam. "Where did you come from?" Kale asked, stopping directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his irises. "I was found 3 years ago, sire, by the border patrol near Whispering Woods. I had no memory, no name. The pack took me in as charity." "Charity?" Kale scoffed. "They made you a servant because you have no wolf." "Yes, Your Majesty. But you are not human." Kale leaned down, inhaling deeply near her neck. Seraphine shivered, her pulse jumping in her throat. "You smell like nothing, not like a human. Humans smell of dust and sweat and mortality. You smell like empty air, like snow before it falls." He reached out, his large hand cupping her chin gently, forcing her to look up. His skin was rough, calloused from sword training, but his touch was surprisingly tender. "And that accent," he murmured, "that is not something you mimic. That is muscle memory. That is how your tongue was formed to move from infancy." "It was the book, sire," Seraphine said breathlessly. "The letters. They just made sense, like remembering a song I had forgotten." "House Moonshadow fell 33 years ago in the Great Purge," Isolde spoke up, her voice regaining some of its steel. She stood, leaning heavily on her cane. "They were the keepers of the old ways. Their children were trained in the elder tongue from birth. to channel magic without shifting. They were considered too dangerous, too powerful. The hunting continued for over a decade, seeking any who escaped the initial massacre. Isolde stepped closer, her eyes hard. If she is of that bloodline, Kale, she is a threat. The council ordered the complete extermination of Moonshadow for a reason. They were said to be able to command alphas with words alone, without using a wolf's voice. They could twist minds. Kale did not look at his aunt. His thumb brushed Seraphine's lower lip, the contact sending a jolt through them both. His wolf paced restlessly in his mind, confused, intrigued. She is a girl with a scrub brush, Aunt, Kale said quietly. Not a sorceress. She is an anomaly, Isolde snapped. We cannot have anomalies in the royal house. Cast her out, or better yet, send her to the dungeons until we discover who taught her that forbidden tongue. Seraphine flinched. The dungeons beneath Stormwatch Castle were spoken of in whispers among the servants. Dark, damp places where prisoners forgot their names. No, Kale said. The word was final, absolute. He released Seraphine's chin and stepped back, though his eyes never left her face. She stays, and she is no longer a scullery maid. Isolde gasped. You cannot be serious. I need a translator, Kale said smoothly, though the lie was obvious in the way he looked at Seraphine. The northern negotiations are stalling because we rely on modern interpreters who butcher the nuance of the old treaties. If she can read Elder tongue as easily as she breathes, she is the most valuable asset in this kingdom. You intend to bring a wolfless savage into the war room? Isolde looked as if she might have a stroke. I intend to keep her where I can see her, Kale corrected. He turned to Seraphine, his expression softening slightly. From this moment, you are under my direct protection. You will move your things to the guest quarters in the East Wing. You will be clothed appropriately, and you will be ready to work by dawn. Seraphine felt the room spin. The East Wing, guest quarters. That was where visiting dignitaries stayed, not servants. Sire, I do not know if I can... Do you know the penalty for speaking the Elder tongue if you are not of royal blood? Kale interrupted, his voice low. Seraphine shook her head. Death, Kale said, by public execution. I have just given you a position, Seraphine. The alternative is the executioner's block. He was not saving her out of kindness, she realized. He was capturing her. He was intrigued, perhaps even drawn to the mystery she represented. He was keeping the puzzle box close so he could figure out how to open it. I understand, Your Majesty, Seraphine whispered. Good. Kale turned to his aunt. Arrange quarters for her, near my private library. Near, Isolde's eyes narrowed. This is dangerous, Kale. If she tries to assassinate me with a teacup, I think I can handle it, Kale said dryly. He moved toward the door but paused, looking back at Seraphine. And Seraphine? Yes, sire? Do not hide that voice again, he said, a strange darkness passing over his face. It is the first real thing I have heard in this castle in 20 years. He swept out of the room, leaving Seraphine alone with a fuming regent and a destiny that had just shifted from invisible to blindingly, terrifyingly bright. As she watched the empty doorway, a sharp pain spiked through her temples. A flash of memory assaulted her, unbidden and violent. Fire. Snow. A woman with silver-streaked hair screaming in that same beautiful, aching Elder tongue accent. Run, little star. Run until you forget who you are. Seraphine touched her throat. She had forgotten. She had buried herself so deep in silence that even her own name had become a borrowed thing. But the king had just commanded her to remember. And that, she understood with a bone-deep certainty, might be the most dangerous thing of all. The guest quarters in the East Wing smelled nothing like the servants' dormitory. There was no stench of unwashed bodies packed too close, no mildew creeping up stone walls, no rats scurrying in the darkness. Instead, the air carried the scent of beeswax candles, lavender sachets tucked into fresh linen, and something else. Something Seraphine could only describe as the metallic tang of power. She stood in the center of her new room, a space larger than the entire corner she had shared with 6 other servants. The bed was a work of carved oak draped in midnight blue silk. A fireplace crackled with birch logs, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting the great hunts of the Nightborn lineage. A knock at the door made her turn. A seamstress entered, her arms laden with fabric the color of charcoal and storm clouds. The woman's face was pinched, her mouth full of pins that made her words come out sharp and muffled. Stand still, she commanded. For the next hour, Seraphine was measured, cinched, and dressed like a doll. The gown they fitted her with was not a servant's uniform, but it was not the finery of a noblewoman either. It was something in between. Charcoal velvet with a high collar and long sleeves, tailored with severe elegance. No jewels, no embroidery. His Majesty requested no decoration, the seamstress said, stepping back to assess her work with a critical eye. He said, "You are not to be adorned, you are to be distinct." Seraphine looked at herself in the tall gilded mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger. Without the grime of the scullery, without the hunched posture of submission, her features emerged with startling clarity. Her hair fell in honey-colored waves past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held her attention. Bright, almost luminous in the firelight. They looked like the eyes of someone who could read dead languages and terrify queens. That night, Seraphine did not sleep. She sat by the window watching the snow fall over the training grounds below and tried to understand what was happening to her life. 3 days ago, she had been invisible. Now she was a mystery the king had decided to solve. The question that gnawed at her was simple. What happened when he grew bored of the puzzle? Dawn came cold and pale. A royal guard appeared at her door, his face like carved granite. "The king awaits you in the map room." Seraphine followed him through corridors she had only ever cleaned, past nobles who fell silent as she passed, their eyes tracking her with a mixture of hostility and hunger. She was no longer the wolfless mute. She was the anomaly the king had plucked from the ashes. The map room was vast, dominated by a circular table covered in charts, compasses, and half-empty goblets of wine. King Kale stood by the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. He was still in yesterday's formal wear, his collar unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with muscle and scored with old scars. He did not turn when she entered. "Leave us," he said to the guard. The door clicked shut, and the silence stretched between them like a taut string waiting to snap. "Come here," Kale said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Seraphine approached the table. What she saw made her breath catch. Spread across the surface were not maps, but scraps of parchment, torn fabric, even a piece of bark, all covered with the jagged script of the Elder Tongue. "These were found on the bodies of the rogues who attacked the West Gate," Kale said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were bloodshot, the storm-gray irises swirling with agitation. "My scholars say it is gibberish, the ravings of feral wolves gone mad." He placed both hands on the table, leaning toward her. "Tell me it is gibberish, Seraphine. Tell me I do not have a coordinated insurrection on my doorstep written in a language that has been dead for 3 centuries. Seraphine looked down at the scraps. The headache from yesterday pulsed behind her eyes again, but this time she did not fight it. She let the pressure build. The letters did not swim. They locked into place like pieces of a puzzle she had been born to solve. She picked up the piece of bark, her fingers tracing the crude carvings. "It is not gibberish," she said softly, her voice dropping into that strange resonant timbre. The accent of the old world slipped over her tongue like silk. "It is a rallying cry." Kale went very still. "Read it." "This one," she pointed to the bark, "says, 'The star has fallen into the mud. We ride to retrieve the light before the shadow swallows it.'" She moved to the torn fabric. "And this? 'Beneath the roots of the iron oak, where the brothers bled.'" Kale swore, a harsh sound that made Seraphine flinch. "The iron oak, that is the site of the Treaty of Brothers, deep in the neutral territories." He looked at her, his gaze stripping away her defenses layer by layer. "Who is the star, Seraphine?" Seraphine shook her head, her heart hammering against the velvet bodice. "I do not know, sire. I swear it." "You have no wolf," Kale murmured, stepping around the table until he stood directly behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the wood smoke and the rain scent that was uniquely his. "You have no memory, and yet you speak the language of the people my ancestors slaughtered." He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Are you the star, Seraphine? Did they come to the castle for you?" "I am nobody," she gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the table to keep her knees from buckling. The proximity of an alpha of his magnitude was overwhelming. It triggered something primal in her, a biological imperative to submit. But her mind, her strange human mind, wanted something else entirely. It wanted to lean back into him. "You are not nobody," Kale said, his hand sliding up her arm, his thumb pressing into the soft skin of her inner wrist, feeling her racing pulse. "You are the most dangerous puzzle in my kingdom, and I am going to solve you." He stepped away abruptly, the loss of his warmth leaving her shivering. "You will stay here," he commanded, moving back to the window. "You will translate every scrap in this room. If you find a name, a date, or a threat, you tell me immediately." He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "And Seraphine, Do not leave this room. There are wolves in this castle who would tear your throat out just to see if you bleed red or blue. You belong to me now. That is the only reason you are still breathing." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of translation work and stolen moments. Seraphine sat at the massive table, surrounded by ancient texts and cryptic messages, her hand cramping from endless writing. But she could not stop. The words were hypnotic. They told a story of a lost empire, of a bloodline that did not just shift into wolves but commanded the very elements. It was history the victors had tried to erase. Kale came and went at odd hours, sometimes staying for only minutes, other times settling into the chair beside her and watching her work in silence. The tension between them grew with each passing day. On the third night, he arrived at 3 in the morning, looking worse than she had ever seen him. His shirt was gone, revealing a torso mapped with scars and intricate tattoos of the royal bloodline. He carried a bottle of whiskey in one hand. He stopped when he saw her, still hunched over the table. "You are still awake?" "You told me not to leave," Seraphine said, her voice raspy from disuse. Kale huffed a dry laugh and collapsed into the chair beside her. He took a long pull from the bottle, then offered it to her. Seraphine hesitated, then took it. The whiskey burned a path down her throat, warming her from the inside. "Why are you awake?" she asked, emboldened by the late hour and the amber liquid. Kale leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "The noise," he muttered. 5,000 wolves in this city. I can hear them through the pack bond. Their dreams, their fears, their petty squabbles. It is a constant hum in the back of my skull. The curse of being an Alpha King. We are linked to everyone." He opened one eye, looking at her sideways. "Everyone but you." Seraphine set the bottle down carefully. "Is that why you keep me close? Because I am a blind spot?" "You quiet the storm," Kale said simply. He shifted his chair closer, the wood scraping against stone. Without warning, he reached out and took her ink-stained hand in his. The moment their skin touched, Kale let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension in his shoulders melted away. The lines of pain around his eyes smoothed. "When you are near," he whispered, staring at their joined hands with something like wonder, "the hurricane becomes a whisper. I can think clearly for the first time in years." Seraphine looked at their hands. His was massive, calloused, dangerous. Hers was small, pale, stained with the words of his enemies. "I do not understand," she said softly. "I am wolfless. I am broken." "Maybe," Kale said, his thumb tracing the veins on the back of her hand. "Or maybe you are the only whole thing in this place." He turned his body fully toward her, and the air in the room shifted. It was no longer the tension of captor and captive, king and servant. It was something else, something magnetic and dangerous. "You possess a power you do not understand, Seraphine," Kale said, his voice dropping to a rumble in his chest. "My aunt is terrified of you. The council wants you dead." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the dilation of his pupils. "And I," he said slowly, "just want to keep touching you." Seraphine's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Every instinct told her to pull away. He was the king. She was a servant, a mystery, a potential threat. But she did not move. She leaned in, drawn by a gravity she could not name. "Kale," she breathed. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. He did not correct her. His gaze dropped to her lips. He tilted his head, closing the distance between them. And then the door to the map room flew open with a crash. Kale snarled, a feral sound, and spun around, positioning his body between Seraphine and the intruder in a blur of motion. General Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway, pale and gasping. "Forgive me, sire, but the council has called an emergency session. They demand the girl's presence." Kale's hands clenched into fists. "On what grounds?" "Evidence has been discovered, Your Majesty. They say it proves she is a spy." The great hall was packed with the bodies and buzzing with tension. The council of elders sat in a semicircle on the raised dais, their faces stern and unyielding. Regent Isolde sat at the center, looking like a statue carved from ice in judgment. Lady Thessaly stood beside her, and there was something in her expression that made Seraphine's stomach drop. Triumph. Kale stood at the center of the hall, his posture radiating barely controlled fury. When Seraphine was escorted in by 4 guards, the crowd parted like water before a blade. She walked down the long crimson carpet, her velvet gown heavy around her legs, and felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. Hating, judging, fearing. "Step forward, girl," Elder Thaddeus commanded. He was an ancient wolf with a scar running down his face and eyes like chips of flint. Seraphine stopped at the base of the dais. She looked at Kael. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. Courage. We have found the thief, Lady Thessaly announced, her voice ringing clear and shrill through the hall. Or rather, the accomplice. She stepped forward, holding a cloth bundle. With a dramatic flourish, she whipped away the fabric to reveal a dagger. It was made of black obsidian, the hilt carved into the shape of a crescent moon wrapped in silver filigree. This blade was found hidden in the guest quarters, Thessaly said, her eyes glittering. It is a ceremonial dagger of House Moonshadow. It reacts only to the blood of the old bloodlines. She turned her predatory smile on Seraphine. The guards found this tucked beneath the mattress in the king's newest acquisition. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. That is a lie, Seraphine said, her voice shaking but clear. I have never seen that dagger in my life. Then you will not mind touching it, Isolde said smoothly from her throne. If you are truly a wolfless nobody, the blade will remain dormant. But if you are a Moonshadow spy, the blade will sing. This is a farce, Kael growled, stepping forward. She has been under my supervision every moment. She could not have entered the vault. Unless she used the shadow walk, Elder Thaddeus countered. A Moonshadow talent. We must know what she is, my king, for the safety of the pack. Kael's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked at Seraphine and she saw the conflict warring in his eyes. He could not stop this without looking like he was protecting a traitor. He needed her to pass the test. Do it, Seraphine, Kael said, his voice tight. Prove them wrong. Seraphine stared at the black dagger resting on its velvet cloth. She felt a pull toward it, a magnetic hum in her bones, the same feeling she had gotten from the ancient book. The object wanted her. She reached out. Her hand trembled as her fingers stretched toward the obsidian hilt. The moment her skin made contact, the world exploded. It was not violent, it was gentle. A soft silver glow emanated from the blade, warm and welcoming, like moonlight on water. But the glow grew brighter, stronger, until the entire hall was bathed in ethereal radiance. And then the visions came. Seraphine gasped as images flooded her mind. A palace of white stone. Gardens filled with night-blooming flowers. A woman with silver-streaked hair bending over a cradle, singing in the elder tongue. The woman's face was older, careworn, but unmistakable. It was like looking into a mirror aged by decades. Mother, Seraphine whispered. The dagger pulsed in her hand, and the silver light coalesced above the blade, forming a shape. Not a wolf, not a dragon, but a symbol. 3 stars arranged in a crown, the mark of House Moonshadow. Lady Thessaly stumbled backward, her face pale. The crowd erupted in shouts and screams. She is the heir. Isolde stood from her throne, pointing a shaking finger at Seraphine. She is Moonshadow blood. Arrest her. Execute her before she... No, Kael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He moved with terrifying speed, placing himself between Seraphine and the advancing guards, his own sword drawn. She is under my protection, Kael said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. And as of this moment, I declare her my intended queen. Anyone who raises a weapon against her declares war on the crown. The hall erupted into pandemonium. Seraphine stood frozen, the dagger still glowing softly in her hand, and stared at Kael's broad back. He had just claimed her, publicly, irrevocably. This is madness, Elder Thaddeus roared. She is the enemy. Moonshadow blood is corrupted, dangerous. She is mine, Kael interrupted, turning his head to look at Seraphine over his shoulder. His eyes were blazing. And I will burn this kingdom to the ground before I let you touch her. Isolde descended from the dais, her cane striking the floor with each step. Kael, nephew, think about what you are doing. Your mother was killed investigating Moonshadow survivors. They are deceivers, manipulators. She has bewitched you. She has done nothing but exist, Kael snapped. And you would condemn her for her bloodline? What does that make us? Isolde's face was a mask of anguish. It makes us survivors. It makes us murderers, Kael said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Isolde looked at Seraphine, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes, not hatred, something deeper, something that looked almost like guilt. There is one way to know the truth, Isolde said finally, her voice measured. A memory restoration spell. It will show us her past, reveal if she is truly an innocent or a planted weapon. The spell could kill her, Kael said, or it could exonerate her, Isolde countered. She looked at Seraphine directly. If you have nothing to hide, girl, you will submit to this. Prove to my nephew that you are not a danger. Seraphine met the regent's gaze. There was a challenge there, but also something else. An almost pleading quality, as if Isolde desperately wanted to be proven wrong. I will do it, Seraphine said. I want to know the truth as much as you do. The journey to Sir Morel's sanctuary took 3 days. Kael insisted on escorting Seraphine himself, despite Isolde's strenuous objections. They rode north through pine forest dusted with snow, accompanied only by 2 guards who kept a respectful distance. On the first night, they camped beneath a canopy of stars so bright they looked like shattered diamonds scattered across black velvet. Kael built the fire while Seraphine prepared their meager meal. It was strangely domestic, this routine, almost peaceful. Tell me about your mother, Seraphine said as they sat across from each other, the flames dancing between them. Kael was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. I was 6 when she died. Queen Rhiannon Nightborn. She was kind, I remember that. She used to read to me every night old stories about the first wolves and the moon goddess. How did she die? Investigating rumors of moon shadow survivors, Kael said, his voice flat. She received reports that children had been smuggled out during the purge. She went to verify. They found her body at the base of a cliff. The official report said moon shadow magic compelled her to jump. But you do not believe that. Kael looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. I believe my mother was murdered. Whether by moon shadows or by someone in our own council who wanted her silenced, I have never been certain. Is that why you protect me? Seraphine asked softly. Because I might lead you to answers? I protect you because the chaos in my mind quiets when you are near, Kael said. I protect you because you looked at me in that ballroom and did not flinch. I protect you because something in me recognizes something in you, and I do not have the words for what that is yet. He stood and moved around the fire, settling beside Ian, close enough that their shoulders touched. I am afraid, Seraphine admitted, of what the spell might show, of who I might be. Then be afraid with me, Kael said. He took her hand. We will face it together. That night, Seraphine dreamed of the silver-haired woman again, but this time the dream was clearer. The woman was running through burning corridors, clutching a small child to her chest. Soldiers pursued them, their swords drawn. The woman burst into a chamber filled with moonlight. She placed the child on an altar covered in silver symbols and began to chant in the elder tongue. The words were a binding spell, ancient and powerful. Forgive me, little star, the woman wept as magic poured from her hands, wrapping around the child like chains of light. I must hide you where even I cannot find you. When the world is safe, when the hatred has burned itself out, you will remember, I swear it. The child's eyes, bright, terrified, were Seraphine's own. Seraphine woke with tears on her cheeks. Kael was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, murmuring soft reassurances in the darkness. Sir Morel lived in a cottage at the edge of the world, where the forest gave way to frozen tundra. She was ancient, her eyes milky white with blindness, her hands gnarled like tree roots. But when she turned her face towards Seraphine, the girl felt seen in a way she never had before. The lost daughter, Morel said, her voice like wind through dry leaves. I wondered when you would come. The memory restoration ritual was conducted in a circle of stones beneath the open sky. Seraphine lay on a bed of furs, while Morel chanted and traced symbols in the air with burning sage. Kael held Seraphine's hand throughout, his grip anchoring her as the spell pulled her under. The memories came in a flood. Her mother was Queen Elowen of Moonshadow, and she was alive. Not dead. Alive and hiding in the northern sanctuary, a secret haven for the last survivors of the purge. Seraphine had been 5 years old when the soldiers came. Her mother had cast a binding spell so powerful it erased Seraphine's wolf, her scent, her memories, and even the magical signature that would have allowed Elowen to track her daughter. It was a desperate act of love, a mother severing herself from her child to save that child's life. For 20 years, Elowen had searched, but the spell had worked too well. Her daughter had become a ghost. When Seraphine surfaced from the vision, she was sobbing. She is alive. My mother is alive. Morel nodded slowly. In the northern sanctuary, she leads the survivors still. 52 souls, all that remain of House Moonshadow. Kael pulled Seraphine into his arms, and she wept against his chest while he stroked her hair and promised they would find her mother. They returned to Stormwatch Castle to find the political landscape had shifted in their absence. Lady Thessaly had been arrested, but not for the reasons Seraphine expected. She confessed, Isolde said when they met in her private study. She planted the dagger, yes, but she was not working alone. Who was she working with? Kael demanded. A faction of impoverished nobles whose families lost everything in the Moonshadow Purge, Isolde said. They see your marriage to a Moonshadow as the final erasure of their suffering. Thessaly's family was among them. Seraphine felt a pang of unexpected sympathy. What will happen to her? Execution is the traditional sentence for treason, Kael said. No, Seraphine said firmly. Both Kael and Isolde looked at her in surprise. Her pain is real. Her family did suffer. Killing her only perpetuates the cycle. What would you suggest? Isolde asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Restoration, Seraphine said. Return the lands that were unjustly seized. Give her family a path forward that does not require treachery. Kael studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It will be done. After Kael left to issue the orders, Isolde asked Seraphine to stay. The older woman poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Seraphine before settling into her chair with a weariness that seemed to age her a decade. There is something I must tell you, Isolde said. Something I should have said the moment you spoke that cursed accent in the solarium. Seraphine waited, her heart beginning to pound. 33 years ago, I was a junior guard, Isolde began, her voice distant. Fresh from training, eager to prove myself. The orders came down from the council. House Moonshadow was to be eliminated. Every last member. Men, women, children. She took a long drink of wine. I was assigned to the children's wing. There were 12 of them, ranging in age from 4 to 19. I was told to execute them all. Seraphine's breath caught. I could not do it, Isolde whispered. I looked at their faces and I could not. So I helped them escape. I forged documents, bribed guards, and smuggled them out to the northern sanctuary one by one. The eldest was a girl named Elowen. She was 19, terrified, but so brave. Tears slipped down Seraphine's cheeks. You saved my mother. Yes, Isolde said, and it cost me my sister. Queen Rhiannon discovered what I had done 5 years later. She was going to report me to the council, but before she could, she was killed. The official story is that Moonshadow magic compelled her to jump from a cliff. But I know the truth. The council had her murdered to cover up the conspiracy. They blamed Moonshadows to justify continuing the purge. She looked at Seraphine with red-rimmed eyes. I have lived with that guilt for 22 years. Every time I look at my nephew, I see the sister I could not save. And now I see you, and I see the children I did save. I do not know if I am a hero or a coward, Seraphine. But I am sorry for the fear I have shown you, for the hatred. You are the living proof that some part of me was still good all those years ago. Seraphine set down her wine glass and crossed the room. She knelt before Isolde and took the older woman's trembling hands in her own. You were not a coward, Seraphine said firmly. You chose mercy when the world demanded cruelty. You gave me a chance to exist. That is not something to apologize for. Isolde broke then, her composure shattering. She pulled Seraphine into an embrace and wept like a woman who had been holding back tears for decades. When Kael found them hours later, they were sitting together, talking quietly about Elowen, about Rhiannon, about the weight of secrets kept too long. That evening, Seer Morel arrived at the castle, summoned by urgent message. She brought grim news. To break the binding spell and restore Seraphine's wolf, there is a price, Morel said. They were gathered in Kael's private chambers. The king, the girl, the regent, and the seer. What price, Kael demanded. The spell your mother cast, child, was fueled by her own life force. To undo it requires an equal exchange. The restoration of your wolf will sever the mate bond with King Kael. The magic cannot sustain both. You must choose, your power or your love. The words landed like a physical blow. Seraphine looked at Kael, and the devastation in his eyes mirrored her own. There must be another way, Kael said. There is not, Morel said gently. This is the cost of the old magic. Balance must be maintained. Seraphine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had just found him. This sanctuary, this man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. How long do I have to decide? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The choice must be made before the next full moon, Morel said. 3 weeks from tonight. After the seer left, Seraphine stood by the window, watching snow fall over the darkened kingdom. Kael came to stand behind her, but he did not touch her. The space between them felt like an ocean. I will not ask you to stay weak for me, Kael said finally. If you choose your power, I will understand. I will still protect you. I love you, Seraphine interrupted, turning to face him. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I do not know when it happened. Maybe when you commanded me to speak up in the ballroom. Maybe when you held my hand through the memory spell. Maybe the very first moment you looked at me and saw something other than nothing. But I love you, K.L. Nightborn, and I do not know how to choose between my power and my heart when you are both. K.L. pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against hers, two rhythms finding synchrony. Then do not choose, he whispered into her hair. Not yet. We have 3 weeks. We find your mother. We bring her here, and we figure out a way to have both. Together. Seraphine nodded against his chest, breathing in his scent of rain and cedar and safety. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. But in Seraphine's mind, a voice whispered, her mother's voice, carried on the wind from somewhere far to the north. Hold on, little star. I am coming. The northern winds carried more than snow that morning. They carried the scent of wolves Seraphine had never encountered, and yet something deep in her marrow recognized them. Not as enemies, as kin. Kale was at her side when the sentries announced the approach of a band of rogues flying white flags of parley. 20 wolves moving with military precision through the forest that bordered Stormwatch Castle. They did not come with bared fangs. They came with purpose. It could be a trap, General Thorne warned, his hand resting on his sword hilt. Or it could be answers, Seraphine said quietly. Kale looked at her, studying the tension in her jaw, the way her gaze tracked the tree line with an intensity that was not quite human and not quite wolf. He made his decision. Let them approach, but keep archers ready. The leader of the rogues was a man who moved like water over stone, fluid and inevitable. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes the color of smoke before a storm. When he removed his hood and knelt in the snow before the castle gates, Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. Not from memory, but from something deeper, from dreams that had no names. Your Majesty, the man said, addressing KL but keeping his eyes lowered, I am Dorian Shadowmere. I come not as an enemy, but as a sworn protector of the Moonshadow bloodline. I seek audience with the girl you have sheltered, the one who speaks the Elder tongue. You may rise, KL said, his voice measured, but know that one wrong move and my archers will cut you down before you draw breath to scream. Dorian rose smoothly. I would expect nothing less, Your Majesty, but I bring warning, not war. There is a viper in your council, and it will strike before the full moon. They convened in the council chamber, a room of dark wood and darker histories. Dorian stood at the center, ringed by armed guards, while Kael sat on his throne with Seraphine at his right hand. Isolde watched from her seat with an expression that cycled between suspicion and something softer. Recognition, perhaps. Speak plainly, Kael commanded. What is this warning? Dorian's gaze finally lifted to meet Seraphine's, and when their eyes connected, she saw tears gathering at the corners of his. We grew up together, he said softly, in the palace of Moonshadow. You were 3 years old. I was 6. You used to follow me everywhere, called me Dory, because you could not pronounce my full name. Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest, a fragment of memory, hazy and warm. A boy teaching her to skip stones across a fountain. Laughter echoing through marble halls. The night the soldiers came, Dorian continued, his voice thick. Your mother sent me away with the first group. I fought to stay with you, but she said I had to live, that I had to protect the others. For 20 years I have kept that promise. We have been searching for you, little star. The rogues you call enemies are your family. We sent those messages to warn you, not threaten you. Warn me of what? Seraphine asked. Of Elder Thaddeus, Dorian said, and the room erupted. This is absurd, Thaddeus snarled from his seat among the council. The old man rose, his scarred face twisted with rage. You dare accuse a council elder based on the word of a rogue? I accuse you based on 3 years of tracking your movements, Dorian said calmly. You have been consolidating power among the nobles whose families suffered in the Moonshadow Purge. You planned to assassinate the king at the coronation ceremony and blame it on Moonshadow magic. Pin it on the girl. Then in the chaos, seize control and institute a purge of anyone with suspected Moonshadow sympathies. You call it justice. I call it genocide. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kale turned his storm-gray gaze on Thaddeus. Is this true? For a long moment, the elder said nothing. Then slowly his shoulders sagged. The rage drained from his face, leaving only hollow grief. My son was 16, Thaddeus said, his voice cracking. 16 years old. They burned him alive for the crime of having a moonshadow friend, a child, just a child who shared his lunch with another child. He looked at Seraphine with eyes that held decades of pain. I have waited 20 years for moonshadow blood to return. I told myself I would take everything from them as they took everything from me. But now I see you, girl. And all I see is another child, just like my son was a child, just like his friend was a child. Thaddeus sank back into his chair. I do not know how to let go of this hatred. It has kept me alive when I wanted to die. It has given me purpose when I had none. But it has also made me into something my son would be ashamed of. Seraphine rose from her seat. Kale reached for her, but she gently pulled away. She walked across the chamber until she stood before Thaddeus. The old man looked up at her, and she saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. The pain of loss, of erasure, of loving someone the world had deemed unworthy of life. Your son's name, Seraphine said softly. What was it? Matthias, Thaddeus whispered. Tell me about Matthias. And so the old man did. He spoke of a boy who loved books more than swords, who rescued injured birds, who dreamed of becoming a healer instead of a warrior. He spoke until his voice broke and tears carved rivers through the landscape of his scars. When he finished, Seraphine knelt before him. I cannot give you back your son, Elder Thaddeus, but I can offer you a choice. You can continue on this path of vengeance and die a monster, or you can help me build something new, a council of truth, where every person who lost someone in the purge, Moonshadow or Wolf, can speak their names, tell their stories, heal through remembering, not forgetting. Why would you offer me mercy? Thaddeus asked, bewildered. Because someone offered it to me, Seraphine said, glancing back at Isolde, and it changed everything. The council voted. Thaddeus would lead the Truth and Reconciliation Council, not as punishment, but as redemption, an old man's final chance to honor his son's memory by choosing peace. The journey north was brutal. They traveled with a small party. Kale, Seraphine, Dorian, General Thorne, Isolde, and 6 guards. The landscape transformed from pine forest to tundra, from snow-dusted paths to frozen rivers that cracked ominously beneath the horses' hooves. On the second night, camped in a cave while a blizzard howled outside, Dorian told stories. Stories of the Moonshadow Palace before the fall, of gardens that bloomed only under moonlight, of libraries filled with books written in the Elder tongue, each one a spell waiting to be spoken. Of Seraphine's mother, Queen Elowin, who had been the youngest ruler in Moonshadow history and the most powerful voice caster in 3 generations. She could stop a charging army with a single word, Dorian said, his face illuminated by firelight. But her greatest magic was always her songs. She sang you to sleep every night, little star. The whole palace would fall silent to listen. Seraphine closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost hear it. A melody older than words, carried on a voice of silver and starlight. On the 4th day, they reached the northern sanctuary. It was not the grand fortress Seraphine had imagined. It was a village of ice and stone, carved into the side of a mountain where the wind could not reach. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in the snow, their laughter carrying on the thin air. 52 souls, all that remained of a civilization. Dorian led them to the largest structure, a hall built of timber and reinforced with what looked like crystallized moonlight. The doors were guarded by 2 elderly warriors who straightened when they saw Dorian, then froze when they saw Seraphine. She has her mother's eyes, one whispered. The interior of the hall was warm, filled with the scent of pine and bread baking. And there, standing before a hearth carved with symbols Seraphine could now read, was a woman. She was not old, but neither was she young. Her hair was the color of silver with streaks of honey gold running through it. Her eyes were bright and fierce and filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have its own gravity. She wore simple clothing, a tunic and leggings suited for the cold, but she carried herself with the bearing of a queen who had never truly abdicated. Queen Elowin of Moonshadow looked up as they entered. Her gaze swept past Dorian, past Kael, and landed on Seraphine. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Elowin's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the hearth, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Little star," she whispered. "My little star." Seraphine ran. She crossed the hall in a blur and threw herself into her mother's arms. Elowin caught her, pulling her close. And for the first time in 20 years, both women wept for all that had been lost and all that had just been found. They clung to each other for what felt like hours. Finally, Elowin pulled back just enough to cup Seraphine's face in her hands. "You grew up," Elowin said, her voice breaking. "You grew up, and I was not there. I searched everywhere, every village, every pack, every corner of this frozen world. But the spell worked too well. I could not find you. You saved me, Seraphine said. You protected me. That is what matters. Elowin's gaze drifted to Kyle, who stood at a respectful distance, his expression carefully neutral. And this is the boy king who grew up without his mother too? Kale inclined his head. Queen Elowin, I am honored to meet you. Do you love her? Elowin asked bluntly. More than I have words to express, Kale said without hesitation. Elowin studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because you are going to need that love for what comes next. They gathered around the hearth as night fell over the sanctuary. Elowin listened as Seraphine explained everything, the binding spell, the choice she had to make, the 3 weeks they had to find another way. There is another way, Elowin said when Seraphine finished, but it requires sacrifice, not yours, mine. Mother, no. Elowin held up a hand. Listen first. The binding I placed on you was fueled by my life force. To break it without severing your bond to Kael, I must channel again. It will weaken me severely. I will lose much of my power, perhaps all of it. I will age more rapidly, but I will not die. I cannot ask you to do that, Seraphine said. You are not asking. I am offering. Elowin smiled, though her eyes glistened. I have spent 20 years searching for you. I would gladly spend my remaining years watching you live fully. That is what mothers do, little star. We give so our children can grow. Isolde, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. There is a third option. All eyes turned to her. I can share the burden, Isolde said. She looked at Elowin with an expression that was almost apologetic. I am old, older than you. I have lived with guilt for decades. Let me do one final good thing. Let me help break the spell that I helped make necessary. Elowin stared at the woman who had saved her life 33 years ago. You would do this? After everything? Because of everything, Isolde said. She crossed the room and knelt before Elowin. I saved 12 children, but I could not save the hundreds who died. I could not save my own sister. Let me help save your daughter. Let me help make something whole out of all this brokenness. Tears slipped down Elowin's cheeks. She reached out and touched Isolde's silver hair. You were so young when you helped us escape. Just a girl yourself. And you were the eldest, Isolde said. You held the children together. You kept them calm when they were terrified. I have thought of you often over the years, wondered if you lived, if any of them lived. 47 of us survived, Elowin said, because of you. Then let us save one more together. The ritual was performed under the light of the waxing moon, 3 nights before it would reach fullness. They stood in a circle carved into the stone floor of the sanctuary's sacred chamber, 3 generations of women bound by loss and love. Elowin stood at the northern point, Isolde at the south, Seraphine at the center. Kale watched from the doorway, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. If this went wrong, if the magic consumed them, he would lose everything. But Seraphine had looked back at him before stepping into the circle and mouthed 3 words. Trust me, so he did. Elowin began the chant in the elder tongue, her voice rich and resonant. Isolde joined her, stumbling over the unfamiliar words at first, then finding the rhythm. Their voices wove together, creating a harmony that made the very air shimmer. Silver light began to emanate from Elowin, golden light from Isolde. The 2 streams of magic spiraled upward, then down, converging on Seraphine. She gasped as power flooded into her. Not violent, not painful, but overwhelming, like a dam breaking after decades of drought. Her wolf, bound and sleeping for 20 years, began to wake. It rose inside her consciousness, not as a separate entity, but as an extension of herself. Silver white fur, eyes that shone bright, and on its chest a mark of 3 stars arranged in a crown. The wolf howled, and the sound shattered through the chamber, through the mountain, through the very sky above. When the light finally faded, 3 women stood in the circle. Elowin's hair had turned fully silver, and she sagged against the wall, breathing hard. Isolde's cane was no longer an affectation. She gripped it for support, her hands trembling. But both were alive. Both were smiling. And Seraphine stood at the center, her eyes glowing with inner light, fully herself for the first time in her life. The coronation was held 3 days later, not in the great hall of Stormwatch Castle, but in the courtyard beneath the open sky. It was a statement, a promise. No more secrets hidden behind stone walls. No more decisions made in shadows. Thousands gathered, wolves from every territory. The 52 survivors of Moonshadow, no longer hiding, but standing proud in the daylight. Nobles and commoners alike pressed shoulder to shoulder, waiting to witness history. Seraphine wore a gown the color of starlight, silver fabric that seemed to shift and shimmer with every movement. Her hair fell in loose waves down her back, threaded with tiny crystals that caught the winter sun. But it was the crown that took everyone's breath away. It had been forged by moonshadow artisans, a delicate creation of silver shaped into 3 stars. Simple, elegant, unmistakable. Kale stood beside her, resplendent in midnight blue and silver. He looked every inch the king, but when he took Seraphine's hand, he looked like a man who had found something far more valuable than a kingdom. Elder Thaddeus, wearing the new robes of the Truth Council, stepped forward to officiate. His voice was steady, but his eyes were soft. "We gather today not to crown a queen," he began, "but to acknowledge what already is. Seraphine of Moonshadow, daughter of Elowin, keeper of the Elder Tongue, has proven herself worthy not through conquest, but through compassion. Not through domination, but through dignity." He turned to Kale. "Your Majesty, do you take this woman as your equal? As your partner? As your queen?" "I take her not as subject, but as equal," Kale said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "Not as possession, but as partner. Not as duty, but as choice. I choose her today and every day hence." Thaddeus turned to Seraphine. "And do you, child, accept this crown and this calling?" Seraphine took a breath. When she spoke, her voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." Kale lifted the crown of 3 stars and placed it gently on her head. The crowd erupted, not in polite applause, but in genuine celebration. Wolves howled, children cheered, and in the front row, Eloin and Isolde stood together, tears streaming down their faces, 2 mothers who had given everything to see this moment. 1 year later, the world had changed. The castle that had once echoed with silence and secrets now rang with life. The Truth Council met weekly, and slowly, painfully, the stories were told. Each name spoken, each loss acknowledged. It did not erase the pain, but it made the burden lighter, shared. The Moonshadow Academy opened its doors, teaching the Elder Tongue to any who wished to learn, not as a weapon, but as a heritage. Children of wolves and children of voice casters sat side by side, learning that magic came in many forms. Lady Thessaly, her family's lands restored, had become a trade ambassador, traveling between territories to teach that unity was not erasure. Dorian had returned to lead the Northern Sanctuary back into the world, no longer hiding, but contributing. The 52 survivors had grown to 70, as those who had hidden in other corners of the kingdom came forward, no longer afraid. And in the royal chambers, in a room painted with stars and filled with soft afternoon light, Seraphine sat in a rocking chair with her mother on one side and Isolde on the other. Between them lay a quilt they had been making together for months, each square representing a life lost in the purge, a memorial in fabric and thread. "This one is Matthias," Seraphine said, pointing to a square embroidered with a bird in flight. "Thaddeus' son. And this is Rihanna," and Isolde added, her finger tracing a silver wolf. "My sister." "And this," Elowin said softly, touching a square covered in stars, "is for all the children who never got to grow up." They sewed in comfortable silence, 3 women who had every reason to hate each other, bound now by something stronger than blood, by choice, by forgiveness, by love. The door opened and Kale entered. His face lit up at the sight of them, but his gaze went immediately to Seraphine. She had never looked more radiant. The pregnancy had brought a glow to her skin, a softness to her features. At 7 months along, she moved more slowly now, one hand always resting on the swell of her belly. "Am I interrupting?" Kale asked. "Never," Seraphine said, setting down her needle. He crossed to her and knelt beside the rocking chair, placing both hands gently on her stomach. Almost immediately, a small foot pressed against his palm from the inside. He laughed, the sound full of wonder. "Still restless," he murmured. "Like her mother." "Or him," Seraphine countered, though they both knew. Elowin had confirmed it weeks ago with a smile and a knowing look. A daughter, a princess who would know both worlds, who would speak both tongues, who would bridge the divide her parents and grandmothers had fought so hard to heal. That evening, as the sun set in shades of amber and rose, Seraphine and Kale stood on their balcony overlooking the kingdom. The same balcony where, a year ago, she had stood in fear and uncertainty. Now she stood in strength and hope. From the courtyard below, the sound of children singing rose on the evening air, a song in the Elder Tongue taught by Moonshadow elders, a song in the modern dialect taught by wolf instructors. 2 melodies woven together into something new, something whole. Kale wrapped his arms around Seraphine from behind, his hands resting protectively over their daughter. She leaned back against his chest, and the familiar peace settled over both of them, the quiet that was theirs alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Kale asked softly. "Choosing this? Choosing me?" Seraphine turned in his arms to face him, cupping his cheek with one hand. "I regret nothing. You gave me a voice when I thought I had none. You saw me when I was invisible. You chose me when the world said I was broken." "You were never broken," Kale said fiercely. "You were always whole. The world just could not see it." "Then we will teach them to see," Seraphine said. "Our daughter will know both worlds, will speak both tongues, will carry forward the peace we built from the ashes of hatred." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "And she will know that her parents chose love over legacy, mercy over revenge, truth over comfort. That is the inheritance that matters." Kale kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Soft and reverent, a promise renewed. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Seraphine closed her eyes and whispered a vow. Not to the daughter growing inside her, but to all the children who had come before. The ones who never got to grow up. The ones whose names were embroidered on a quilt in a room full of love. "I remember you," she said. "Your names, your stories, your light. You are not forgotten. You never will be." The wind carried her words across the kingdom, across the tundra, across the ruins of the Moonshadow Palace where flowers had finally begun to bloom again after 33 years of ash and silence. And somewhere in the spaces between silence and song, between yesterday and tomorrow, between what was lost and what had been found, the world continued to heal. Not because the past was forgotten, but because it was finally, truly remembered. They had said a creature without a wolf had no soul. They were wrong. Seraphine had found something far more precious than a wolf. She had found her voice, her family, her purpose, her love. She had found herself. And in finding herself, she had helped a broken world remember what it meant to be whole.